Hello and welcome. You're listening to Let's Drone Out, and unbelievably, it is the 500th episode.
500.
More believable though is the fact that Frank made a little mistake and booked a guest. So the 500th episode, in true classic LDO fashion, will happen on episode 501. We will not book anything. I wasn't even allowed to buy party poppers at the petrol station because he wanted ID. I'm joking. No, they didn't have any. And we tried to order. I went to the supermarket. They didn't have any things. Some cake fountains, and if we'd ordered them, they would have come tomorrow. So,
but we've got a lot more planned for the 10th year, which is in 20 episodes, 520. A lot happening for that. This is episode 500. Woo!
Woo!
Yes. Well done us for 500 episodes. We're we're doing well, keeping going. But you can't blame me for booking the guest. This is John Lancaster, RoboBiggles. I mean, I am very, very happy that John is on tonight. I've been wanting to drag John on for 7 years, and I've finally plucked up the courage to drag John into this morass of LDO. I figured it's actually finally time. I think we actually can do a good job and not do John a disservice.
Without further ado, RoboBiggles, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So John has his YouTube channel RoboBiggles, which has popped up a load of times in a load of different places. So people watching and listening at home may be familiar with the name RoboBiggles anyway. But basically, it's a lot of scale FPV, and I've known John for 7 years, as I say, through this and that and the other, which I'm sure we'll go through tonight. But before we go any further, John, can you explain to people just very quickly what scale FPV means? What is that? Because we've had lots of people on talking about like sticking FPV on fixed wings, doing wing racing. We've had people on talking, we've had Andy Simmons in the BMFA and had talks about all the scale models at like Western Park and stuff. But we haven't had much in the way of, we haven't had anything in the way of scale FPV. We've had some head tracking FPV with Andy RC, but if you could, can you tell us what scale FPV means?
Well, I guess there are variations on this. The simplest thing is it's flying a scale aircraft using FPV. That can be simply sticking a camera on top of a scale model and flying it around. Next stage on is to put it inside a cockpit, but a cockpit as delivered with the model. And the stage on from that, which is where I like to live, is actually building a scale cockpit. So for me, it's about building a scale cockpit so that it feels as though you're in a scale aircraft.
Yeah, so I'll show the people that are watching along with the video. If you're listening along at home on the audio only one, you'll have to find some pictures yourself. But I've brought some photos so that we can show people what we're talking about here. Because this is John's Mosquito, which, as you can see, has this like the detail in this just from this photo, and you can see all the painting around the edge of the frame of the cockpit. You've got the tiny little map. The map is great. I like the map. What area is the map of?
The map is actually a map of the local area where my club flies. Not that you can ever actually see the map in a camera because it doesn't look far enough down. But there we go. Yeah, this is my
camera as well.
Yeah, this is my oldest surviving FPV scale model. This probably goes back 8-9 years now, still flying. It's I think it's on its third camera right now. That one is probably the second one in there. That was pre-digital.
Yes. So how did you get into doing? Did you come from like the scale model side and then come across FPV, or did you come across FPV and then decide to build some scale models, or what was your journey up to sort of starting
flying scale
channel?
Because I love warbirds. I always have done. I grew up on the stories of Biggles by Captain W.E. Johns. That was my boyhood inspiration. And when I first saw FPV, when the very first Fat Shark cameras and goggles came out, my first thought was, my God, at long last, I can actually make myself small and crawl into the cockpit of one of my Airfix kits, which as a kid was like a dream that I had. So I bought a camera, stuck it on top of a glider, just fixed straight forward. That was flown for one flight just to see if I actually could fly a fixed wing with a camera. And when I came down, I was blinking. It was never going up again without a gimbal. So between that flight and the next one, I bought and fitted a pan and tilt gimbal. And that was the start of my journey, really. I think it would have been about 2, maybe 3 months later that I finished a cockpit for Park Zone Spitfire, which one of the guys in the squadron still flies around, but not FPV anymore. And after that, there was a hurricane, and just put more and more detail into the cockpit so that it felt atmospheric.
Yeah, and it definitely does feel atmospheric. Let me just quickly show a couple of photos so people know kind of what some of the views are from inside this. So this is Stuka dive bombing. I mean, that looks excellent, doesn't it? That looks like something right out of Battle of Britain.
And a teeny wing mirror.
It looks great. One question I've got
the most fun plane
Gianno, if I may, is that when I'm sticking cameras on like FPV planes and they're not scale ones, they're usually quite at the front of the nose, so your view is very open and you can see what you're doing. As soon as I'm thinking about a cockpit of a warbird, I'm thinking there's quite a big nose in front of me with a propeller on, and especially when I'm thinking takeoffs and landings, is that difficult?
Yeah, yeah. The pile of foam in my loft is a testament. But that's part of the whole joy of doing this for me. Is it's not, if I wanted to go for a sightseeing tour, I'd go by drone, and I'd fly one of those around because they're brilliant for that. For me, it's about trying to imagine what it was like to be in one of these warbirds. That's the view these guys actually had to deal with and what they actually had to fly with. And it is surprising how much more difficult it is. You start learning to fly sideways as you're coming into land. You start learning how to look 45 degrees out the side of the cockpit because you can't always see the runway straight ahead of you. So yeah, it's very realistic, but yes, it's quite a bit more difficult.
And what you've done really well as well is pull a lot of people together at different events and fly together, right? So then you end up with these sort of experiences where you've got your Spitfire cockpit here, but you've got the 110 in the rear view mirror chasing you down. You've got your Bandit on your 6, and that's cracking, isn't it?
Flight in flight, which is all flight scale the other side from this flight, so I can actually see both sides of the battle, as it were.
Yeah, I mean there's sort of, you've got quite a range as well. I mean we've shown like the Stuka and the Spitfire, and then you've got like your multi-engine aircraft as well that you've been doing as well, right? So this is, I mean, you showed the Mozzie that was your old one, but you've got the 110 that's perhaps, is this a screen accurate 110 or screen tested 110?
It's exactly made for the size of cockpit and the scale, but this is a Dynam 1.5 wings. It's the cockpit's not big. They're only normally a couple of inches across. So when you try to think about what you're looking at here, some of those dials are 3 millimeters across from one side to the other. It's not huge, but I think, well, yeah, you try printing that out in the first place and then stick it into a hole in a plastic dashboard. I think the thing for me is so fascinating is you do really get the view that the pilot actually got, and there's no way a guy is ever going to be able to afford to fly inside the cockpit of a real Spitfire or a Hurricane or a 110 or a 109, much less all of them. But that's actually genuinely affordable doing this for a normal guy. And so I kind of week I would just love to Kermie doing all these Kermie cam videos, but for to learn to fly things or to buy them like he can.
Have you experimented with different size aircraft, and have you ever considered aiming for live instruments instead of painted ones?
One of the problems you have with that is that the size of the instruments is so small that if you could get one to work, the camera probably wouldn't be picking it out. The camera is so close to the board. You either set the camera to infinity, in which the view outside is nice and crisp, which you need to be able to fly safely, in which case the stuff inside is going to be soft focus. If you reset the camera to focus clearly on the dials, which would make that a worthwhile endeavor, you then wouldn't be able to see outside properly. You'd be flying through a fog. And that is one of the restrictions that we kind of have. If you do go for a bigger aeroplane, it becomes more realistic. There's a guy in the model squadron who has an ESM Mech 10, which I think is about a 14-foot wingspan. It's huge. I built an FPV cockpit for it with both the gunner's position in the back, pilot's position in the front, built radio equipment, the Morse receivers, the guns, the ammunition racks. Pretty much, if it's in the real thing, it's in that model. Even that is only about 5 inches across the whole cockpit. Now, the focus, because the camera's far enough away from the dashboard, with taking a moving dial and see it work, it'd be so small. I'm not sure that you'd realistically be able to make one. What is a great development that's been around now is there's a couple of guys who are making small LCDs. They're about 1-2 inches square, and they are building those so that you've got electronic or digital gauges where you can either have it as numbers moving around or analog gauge.
You just have a little OLED screen built in.
The mixture of those is great, but because they're kind of shiny, yeah, it's exactly what it is. And for the jet models, it's great because it actually can be quite realistic. And there's a guy called Ji Jian who is now building these cockpits, and he's a master 3D CAD designer. So he now actually designs a 3D model for a cockpit, and then he 3D prints the whole thing, paints it and puts it in these models. He could do that in probably a quarter of the time it would take me, and they look absolutely stunning. And he has started building LEDs and LCDs into those panels. He's just done a 29 where there are illuminated dials. There are ones that are actually moving. I mean, it is absolutely fantastic. But I don't have that CAD skill, unfortunately. So, scratch builder.
Well, it still looks excellent.
I did 3D print if I can find a file. If someone's already made the file, I'll print it and use it if I can. It saves a lot of time and they're normally really good.
Yeah, I mean, there's, like you say, sort of the cockpit itself isn't going to be what's in focus, right? You're sort of focusing on the view
unless
outside.
You've got something so big that it would be truly terrifying to fly. Which case you're probably not.
And to be fair, you have some restrictions on what's legal as well. There's a limit for 3.5 kilos to be able to fly using the exam. If you're flying an FPV model over 3.5 kilos, you use a competent observer. You've actually got to use on a buddy lead. And what that does mean is you can either fly FPV with a gimbal, or you can fly with a buddy. But they both rely on the use of the buddy port on the back of, or the trainer port on the back of your controller. And so unless somebody can come up with a device that allows the same trainer port to control the pan and tilt of the camera in the cockpit, and well, it may be available. I've not come across it. When that's possible, then the big plant would become a real opportunity to build an FPV cockpit in and still have your buddy pilot connected whilst you've got head tracking. But I personally won't fly without head tracking. So it's 3.5 kilos is my flying limit.
Fair enough.
Which in the UK that's what it is.
Yeah, but you've done a very good job with it, I have to say.
Yeah, ingenious.
If anything, if you are ever that will actually you use the back controller to have both a buddy and FPV pan and tilt control at the same time, I love to hear about it.
I might be one of those. Check out the Express LRS project and see what they're doing, because they seem to be bolting extra ports on with every single release. So.
Yeah, there was sort of historically there was the whole sort of personal area network stuff that the Crossfire or the TBS system was going to do, but I don't know if it ever actually.
What you can do is you can have the trainer running over a serial connected Bluetooth, and that gives you your trainer, and then you can use the DSC port, which you'd normally have as a trainer port, physical port for the head tracker, or you could put the Bluetooth module on a UART of HTX for your trainer port, and you could punch in the head tracker data wirelessly via Express LRS and just not use the physical cable at all. So I think there's a couple of ways of doing it, but both getting Express LRS working or getting the Bluetooth module working, they're both finicky and they both require a bit of aftermarket work. I think for a lot of systems.
There's quite a lot of setting up, getting all of those working, I would imagine.
Yeah. I tried to solder a Bluetooth module and it was a pain in the butt.
Oh dear, yeah. Andy RC is in the chat and says the problem he is having. Oh no, that is not the one I wanted to show. Where's Andy's one gone? The problem that he is having with the LCD is that they only look good towards dusk because of the brightness. So they're not bright enough to show up in the sun beaming down through your cockpit, even when it's grim and grey. So that's another problem. Gigawatts in the chat suggests or maybe transparent e-ink displays, or even e-ink displays generally might show that. But still, I mean, you're not going to be able to read any of this, right? It's going to be like
it's not your primary source of information in aircraft of that age. If you're doing Spitfires and stuff, is it? They're nice to have, but
yeah.
Andy suggests dual receiver setup as well.
But from a spheric point of view. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Dual receiver setup's probably a very practical thing if you've got room for it. Some of the smaller models would struggle, but some of the larger ones getting up towards 3.5 kilos, that's the real option. And hopefully at some point Andy and his Red Arrows wingman will explore that. Phil, I think his name is.
Absolutely, yeah.
I believe Phil may be listening. If Phil, if you are listening, stick a message in the chat. We'll give you a shout out. We've mentioned Model Squadron a couple of times, so we should probably sort of explain what that was. How did you get involved with the Model Squadron? And do you want to give us a brief overview of sort of what happened there with the Channel 4 show?
Yeah, so obviously you already Love Productions asked to pair a series, 3-part TV series, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the RAF, and they sought out pilots to take part via the BMFA. So the BMFA put out essentially an advertisement on behalf of Love Productions asking for pilots, and they did the same thing in Germany. The V was the German equivalent to the BMFA, and from 6 months, I actually sent in the application form and sent in a video. But I wasn't selected to be one of the participating pilots. Andy, you were lucky enough to get that. But I did get a weird phone call from one of the producers, basically saying that my video, which had primarily been of me whizzing around in a hurricane in an FPV cockpit, was of interest because they actually wanted to use. I was our technical consultant to design and build the cockpit for all the airplanes, and there were about 48 radio control pilots from Germany and the UK that got together to help make the program down in Dorset for 2 weeks in June of 2018, and around about half of the from that show have continued to regularly 3-4 times a year to get together and fly in multiple formations and have fights and things. More and more of them are actually becoming FPV pilots as the years go on. I think we're up to about 5 FPV pilots in the squadron now. But what we're also doing is when we meet one of our meets each year now, we're making an invitational meeting. So it's just a reunion of the cast. We invite guests to come along and join us. So Andy, RC and Phil have been to one of them, coming along to join us in May. We've got a couple of other people. May. We've had Richard Rawlton with his giant mosquito, which is absolutely fantastic to watch. It's not FPV, but for scale warbird lovers, which pretty much everyone in the model squadron is, that's an awesome piece of kit. So we have opened up to maybe each who are interested in birds and scale FPV. It's been fantastic for us as it's opened it up a little bit. That's how we met Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the Channel 4 show filming down in Chickle, although it was only 2 weeks, I mean, there was an awful lot of FPV going on there. There was a few of us there that had done FPV before and sort of knew our way around VTXs and VRXs and things, but I mean, I don't think, other than you and a couple of others, I'm thinking particularly Lee and Matt, I don't think anyone else had done scale or head tracking FPV before or really come across it. So how much of the FPV cockpits that went into the Channel 4 show, how much of that was kind of you desperately building stuff in the run up to the show, and how much was you sort of sharing designs and getting other people to build them?
Well, you're something of a mad panic. The producers wanted 25 FPV cockpits in 6 weeks from the point where they first spoke to me and asked me to get involved. There's no way that could have done that on my own. So Matt Howell scale FPV in the production, that only 3 scale FPV pilots that they actually got involved were all on the technical team who were not involved in flying on the actual show. So yeah, between us, we got it done. I designed all the cockpits. One of each made aircraft. There was a 109, a Spitfire. There's all requests for a Heinkel, but we just didn't have time to do that. So I designed each of the cockpits, put together a build video and a list of parts, most of which I'd produced multiples of at the time when I built the first one. Those parts and those build videos were sent out to Matt and Lee in another part of the country, along with the cockpits and components, and they built the others. So with the 4 Hurricane cockpits, I think I built 3, and 1 was built by the other 2 guys. The 109s, I only built 1. The other 4 were built by Matt and Lee. I did one of the 110s, and the other. Actually, I did both the 110s, and then both the Stukas. Actually, had a pretty decent model cockpit in it. It's that way with a nice panel, and we had enough people on the show that the FPV cockpit for the Heinkel 111 was done by a team working on it collectively at Chickerell whilst we were doing the filming of the first week. The Heikel's been in the background. I think there are about 5 or 6 in creating that cockpit.
Yeah, because the filming and flying and everything was happening sort of all at once. So it was a pretty mad experience, and it felt like we were going from like 6 o'clock in the morning to midnight. It seemed like there was just stuff happening the entire time for 2 weeks solid. It was a very intense experience, and I mean, we were not like picking the best days for the weather to go flying. It was, we've got this entire crew, massive film crew here, massive production going on. There's no time. You can't just wait for the right weather. We've just got to fly constantly. So there was, gale force winds, and there'd be someone there trying desperately to fly. So obviously the editor picks those bits of the flying, the crashing bits of the flying, to go into the final production. But there was, a lot of flying. We had a lot of pyro as well, so that was kind of what I ended up being handed, was a load of pyro boards and infrared laser tag systems that were all kind of half built and that no one had really done anything with before, and it was just sort of handed them and told, make these work. It was like, okay, I will try my best. And they did work. They worked very, very well. They worked so well that as soon as someone fires their guns on the ground, all the pyros go off. Just a lot of pyro. It's got all these aircraft all lined up on the ground, ready to take off, and someone goes, "Oh, just make sure my guns work," and then just a load of smoke everywhere. It was dramatic. So we had to sort of learn to teach people not to touch that button until they were in the air, please. It was a lot of learning experiences like that.
Because your pyro experience was where you were surrounded by loads of it. I got luckier than you, because when we were testing them, there was normally only 2 aircraft ready for testing. So when Matt and I went to test fly the first Hurricane and ME-109, expecting we were just going to be testing the FPV gear and the designs, no, the pyro guns produced, and were busy fitting the pyros whilst we were trying to get ready to do the first test of these 2 aircraft. And before you knew it, we were actually charging around with pyros and infrared guns and lasers. And the only time I ever actually got to fly for this was when we were doing all the test flights for all of the FPV models when they first came up. And with that session, I remember at one point, actually the alarm on 09 Hurricane, and I'm claiming it as my only kill from the entire series. Pyros didn't work, so all we got was the red buzzers going off.
I mean, the other thing was, I was given a laptop that had a little controller that had an RF link to all the pyro boards, so that I could it was intended to be that we would get all the timestamps of when all the hits were made and all the pyro went off, so that the editors could take those timestamps with the camera and do stuff with it, and help their editing. It turns out that with all the FPV going on, and all the transmitters and all the radio mics and all the talkback systems and everything else, all the radio frequency stuff in the air, this poor little laptop had no chance of connecting to anything more than about 3 feet away from it. So while everyone was convinced that I was just triggering off their pyro when they hadn't really been hit and it was just for show, it's no, if you're pyroing off, there's nothing to do with me. It was entirely someone has has tagged you with the laser tag. So it you know, if it was in the air and the pyro went off, that was an actual hit.
Went through the our Luftwaffe team did not believe that. And if you think about the amount of RF noise there was in that, with all of the FPV frequencies in use, the infrared was pretty much the only thing that was going to cut through it. So
Absolutely. I mean, the FPV side of things as well. I mean, because this is like a proper production, like Ofcom is very important to them. They need to keep the sort of relationship with Ofcom very good. So they probably went all out with it, right? And they got all the licenses to use all the FPV, you know, all the power, all the milliwatts, all the megahertz, just everything. Which I mean, the word was it was a very expensive. Just that bit would be enough to make every one of us here weep slightly. Let alone the enormous production team doing the filming and audio. Yeah. So
the frequency plan was quite complex. They got with a degree in radio to build the frequency plan because it was that complicated. They wanted to have so many simultaneously that in order to do that, they had to pay for additional frequencies to be licensed to be used because the number that are normally usable for FPV was simply inadequate. And also the power output that is permitted in the UK wouldn't have been enough for the distances, and the number also had to pay for additional licenses to use extended power output. And essentially it was X number of licenses per day per frequency at the power output was required. It ran into thousands. It was not cheap.
Yeah, I heard it was, you know, a 5-figure sum to do that. So yeah, that is, if you want to do it properly, it is not a cheap thing to do. To have so much FPV going on, but it was worth it. I mean, there was some great stuff there, and like you say, like, enough of us had a great time that then when you then started organising some of the meetups later on, I mean, we've just kept on meeting up, having all these reunions, carrying on, you know, doing the same sort of things, you know, even without the cameras watching, and it's been great. And we had the invitational, last year, like you said, which we're going to have again in a month or two, with
Phil?
Andy RC and Phil bringing along their Red Arrows, and Andy had his Typhoon as well, and yeah, you know, you've been there actually helping people get into the scale FPV and get into FPV full stop. And so, yeah, thank you very much for your efforts in keeping that like community growing and keeping it a thing, because it's been great fun. And personally, I very much appreciate someone else organising an event. There's all sorts there. So we had the FPV combat guys, I believe, who came along, and we've had on the show before, and we had a moment there of like, he recognized me, I recognized him, and we're like, I know you from somewhere, and it was from LDO. So yeah, we have had the FPV combat guys on before. It was good to go out and, you know, have a
well, that's the two guys with the that's the same guys again. The two guys with the goggles on, Jens and Björn. Certainly Björn, I think, runs the FPV combat camp that gets set up in Europe each year, where normally they have about 25 or 30 FPV. I mean, flying scale FPV aircraft, you tilt. Cockpits are not really particularly detailed. They make airplanes built like tanks because the lids are just and they're basically repairing them with packing tape to reinforce them. So they have a lot of fun doing the dogfighting side of it. they're less interested in how great the cockpit looks, but the amount of fun those guys when they up is it.
And to have like a handful of FPV, like using up all the FPV we can fill at Buckminster, having all these FPV warbirds up there, and having all the line of sight filling the sky as well. You just have this. For me, that is great. Just when there's just a cloud of things buzzing around, having these dogfights, that is great fun to watch. And yeah, so we sort of took that to Charlton Park as well. So if anyone remembers Piece of Cake, a TV show back in the late 70s, early 80s, I feel like. Which is,
it was about 88, I think it was filmed.
There we go.
That's film park in Wiltshire, which was taking the part of this French chateau called Chateau Pierre. It was nice to get a chance to go and fly there last summer, because we were there basically 6th, 7th, 8th of June, so across the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Needless to say, all the photos were painted with black and white D-Day stripes. This was real to do if you like so okay, there's the shadow in the background, and it allowed us to imagine the return of Hornet Squadron to Chateau Saint-Pierre in 1944, after they left at the end of the Battle of France. It was great to fly there because it is an absolutely beautiful set. We did get really great shots of whole squadron on top of the chateau and along the runway, almost replicating the episode 2 in the original TV series, which is great because the owner of the estate, is the Earl of Suffolk, an acquaintance of one of the squadron, has been for years, and it all came about because he wanted some advice on setting his aircraft up for FPV, and Steve Holland told him to get in touch with me, so I helped set up FPV gear. He was really quite serious, so he wanted to set 7 of them up and bought whole loads of kit. Asked me to go and help him set it up, which I did. At which point, I found out it was the Earl of Suffolk and that this is his estate, and he invited us to fly, and it was absolutely fantastic to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like all the Model Squadron events, it's there's a lot of just sort of mad things happening. There's all the sort of every couple of hours there's a big get together on the flight line with a load of like you see down the bottom here, a load of people flying FPV or giving FPV ride-alongs, but also all the line of sight warbirds filling the sky, giving them something to chase as well. And the atmosphere there is a really fun atmosphere. I love those days, and but also, you know, you do a good job of like using these to try and tell a story. Either it's a sort of a historical story or like a sort of a bit more of a dramatical story. And so you take a lot of this and you make a little video out of this as well, don't you?
Is actually doing the flying and what have you, but we got in a historical recreation of the band has been nice to take the footage that into a history tour, story, something to fun. Okay.
I don't think this is working.
We're sort of losing you a bit here, John. But it'll be recording at your end, so it'll all end up on the audio only podcast at the weekend. So we'll
try disabling
your voice cutting out, John,
and your audio. if it's a bandwidth issue.
Might be. It's looking okay at this end.
Yeah. You haven't got the show running in a tab in the background, have you, or anything
I
else?
think it's just his upload
No,
bandwidth. The
literally
video is
everything.
freezing quite often as well.
Going-
Upload bandwidth is not the same as download. He'll be able to hear us okay, but he hasn't got enough connection to upload.
Yeah, if you down at the bottom of the
I can
call,
hear you,
John,
okay.
there's the stop cam button. If you wouldn't mind giving that a go, that we'll just see if that improves things a little bit. So we'll see if that works any better.
How's
But
Oh,
so far
maybe.
so good. We'll see how we go.
Check. 1, 2, 3 says.
Yeah, John, tell us what you had for breakfast.
You don't know. I'm on a diet. Really don't want to.
Oh dear. So Andy RC, who is in the chat and saying not seen these pictures before, very cool. He asked me beforehand some questions he wants to know from you. So here we go. How much time do you spend researching versus designing and building your cockpits? As you go the extra mile with some of these of actually climbing into the cockpits and finding where the eye line is when you sit in there.
I think the design phase is basically download photographs of actual cockpits. So if you actually sat and put all those together, it probably would add up to a fair bit out of it. Because it's more dull interest. So I've got loads of photographs of these cockpits already. So it's how much to take. The amount of time taken to figure out to put inside the actual model, that does take a lot of time because it's not always obvious where to put the electronics. You've got to think about temperature control. They're all affected by heat. You need to get airflow to them. Also, want them sticking out where they shouldn't stick out. So sometimes trial and error. But build process, detail you go in. I've got some simple ones that have taken things a couple of weeks. I think the longest build, which was the ESM Messerschmitt 110 that I built for one of our German squadron members, Christian. I think it probably took about 4 months every evening and pretty much weekend. That was a huge build. I don't intend to do that bin, I might add, but it's great to get it afterwards. I'm happy with the end result. But the reference you make about getting into a cockpit, I got some feedback from a member of the model squadron who was an NCO in the Battle of Britain at the time, and he pointed out that I'd got the eye line too low in the cockpits of Hurricane, and he got me to the cockpit of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Hurricane down in the flight hangar, just to show me for real where my eyes would be and what I would be able to see, and that resulted in lifting the camera point in my a centimeter and then resetting it. If you're listening, Chris, definitely need to know where to put my eyes in a Lancaster bomber next, because I'm sure I could build one if only I could get into a cockpit to see the right place.
You just need to know where the eye line is, don't you? And there's only one way to do that is to sit in it, preferably while it's in the air, But you'll take on the ground.
Yeah, I think what confuses a lot of people when you see FPV videos from a pilot who's using an action cam in an aircraft whilst it's flying. You often see them Spitfire combat cams where they'll do an air display and you it's on, but normally have that action cam stuck to their helmet. The view that gives you is way above normal line that the pilot himself actually completely unrealistic. But what that means, a lot of people think that you can virtually see the propeller at the end of a Spitfire's nose from the pilot's seat. Well, you can't. The FPV camera stuck on the top of your head might, but you won't.
Yeah, so we need to get some pilots to stick it on their chin instead. That's generally gives you a better, weirdly, a better version of your eye line from sticking it on your head. But there we go. We'll give them that feedback.
Out from the helmet on a stick between your eyes.
Well, you know, maybe I'll ask some people, see what we can do. But the other thing that Andy wanted to know was how do you work out where the camera should be and where it should focus, particularly? Is it a lot of trial and error, or have you got a locked-in formula now?
No, there is no locked-in formula that I'm aware of. This is trial and error. Also depends what you want. So you want clear dials, you want the camera as far away the dashboard as you can possibly get, but that won't necessarily create a realistic distance for the view. So the pilot would often be right near the dashboard, and so he'd have to look down, really down, see the dashboard. He wouldn't see it in normal flight. But if you have a camera a long way back, so you could look at a set of dials, that also means you'll be the whole of the dashboard the whole of the time, which is not realistic either. So there are choices to be made, and I think there's an amount of personal preference to be put into that.
I imagine as well there's a lot of personal preference in Andy's next question, which is how do you draw the line between where the foam ends and your scratch building or your 3D printing begins? I mean, I guess the sort of, you mentioned earlier about the scratch building and 3D printing being the line is the file on the internet already, but where do you leave the foam, and where do you start cutting it away and replacing it with something more scratch buildy?
Very good question, to be fair, Andy. And again, I think there's going to be some choices to be made. If you want to make it realistic and make the cockpit about the right width model that you're in, keep the foam really thin. There's always a thick rim around the edge of. The thinner you cut it, the more realistic your cockpit size will be, but the string in the edge of your cockpit. Generally speaking, the first thing I do is to cut a straight line through the foam right at the very edge of the cockpit and drop a fibre reinforced rod along the whole length of the cockpit right on the edge, just inside the foam. Set it in with either epoxy or with glue. Once that's dried, you've then got a strong outer edge for the cockpit. That's when I start digging out foam. I'll dig it out quite close to the edge if I've got reinforcement in there. If you don't put the reinforcement in and you get too close, your cockpit's just going to come apart the first time you have it. Not that I ever have one of those, obviously.
Yeah, you might be generous and giving someone else a go. That's always an option, right?
Yeah, that would explain all the foam in my loft. Yeah.
I think Andy's final question on my list here is how do you balance your sort of the exact scale of the parts versus just getting it to look right in the camera? Like, do you make it so that the cockpit is 1-to-1, or not 1-to-1, but like is an exact scale replica of the actual aircraft, or do you sort of balance it where you can have a slightly thicker control rod or control lever and move it slightly further away so it just looks a bit smaller and sort of just get it looking right in the camera?
Since 20% of the cockpits I build are scratch built components, they are standoff scale anyway. I try to be about the right scale, about the right position. I'll compare that to photographs, but there is a bit of close enough is good enough in what I do. If I was 3D printing it with a proper 3D design, I might be more careful, but I don't have that skill set. And that's where guys like Jijan are starting to come in. If you ever shares the files for that, I say be making a fortune selling them. But realistically, something has to be made thicker in order to be robust enough to survive. And certainly, you're looking at the photograph there of the B-25. Both control columns for both the pilot and the pilot move with the ailerons. So there is quite a lot of pressure on very thin devices to warrant them being made of metal. So they're actually made of bent wire rather than plastic strength. But of course, it adds weight, and again, it is a real balancing piece. You've got to decide how far. A simple rule about minimizing weight: if it can't be seen from the camera, it doesn't get modeled. So a lot of my cockpits, they do look realistic when you can look in a certain. What you don't realize is that the moment the camera stops, it becomes space, because it's just
yeah. There's the other thing I think we should talk about definitely before we start wrapping up would be, we should talk about how you do the pan and tilt and how you do the head tracking, because those are like the I think the scratch building of a scale cockpit, I think that's just sort of trial and error and a skill you have to build up. But like a few people in the chat this evening have been saying, Richard Warwick in the chat has definitely mentioned it. I think someone else has as well, about there being some off-the-shelf pan tilt systems and head trackers that can make your life a bit easier if you want to give this a go. And I will be honest, I have one of each sitting in a box waiting for me to actually get around to doing it. But John, what do you recommend for people to get going with scale, or at least head tracking FPV?
I think people's budget will be a big part of this. If people are running on a tight budget, there will be some constraints, obviously. If you want to go to the top end of it, probably the best mental unit, as far as I'm concerned at the moment, is something called BAD, which is an acronym that stands for Badass Gimbal, marketed by a company called gosh, it's gone on my head.
Motion Sick.
Motion Sick, yeah, really great name. That's fantastic gimbal. It's pan and tilt, but the uses Savox servos that have been designed for that unit. They've got 270 degrees of rotation, so you can literally look right back over your tail, and do that in both directions for scale FPV combat. That's absolutely fantastic, and it is absolutely smooth, but it's not cheap. I think they're about $75 at the moment, plus shipping over to the UK. But you get what you pay for. If you want to do it on a lower budget, there's a Henge 260 pan. They're pretty hard to find. They're a lot cheaper. They're about 15 quid, and you can then put that into a pan and tilt gimbal that you can 3D print, or you can buy a number of them already printed. There's just a bit of research on the internet for that. I think the one thing I would advise, though, if you want to be inside scale cockpit, the constraints become the cockpit canopy framework. And so a lot of the gimbals, if you look at them, when it comes to panning, they pan, and as they turn around, the camera swings really wide out to the left and the right, because it's out to the front of the pan. Apart from that, it's totally unrealistic. It swings far wider than the cockpit, and you won't get that to work inside a cockpit. If you're happy to sit it on top of the plane, it's great. But if you want it to turn inside, the the camera needs to pan within its own within its own footprint, so that essentially it rotates around its own center. A pan and tilt device like that, regardless of which version, is essential if you want it to be inside a framed cockpit. There's a few of them around. The Motion one will definitely do that, but there are a few others around. And I think if you go onto Thingiverse, where you can download STL files to print your own 3D printed stuff, there are a number of them on Thingiverse, probably 40 or 50 last time I looked, some of which will rotate within their own footprint, and they would be ideal and very inexpensive.
There we go.
The other end of that, of course, is the actual the goggles and the device that sends the signal to the pan and tilt unit. So if you're going to have pan and tilt on your goggles, then those who are good at things like Arduino programming, you can actually program your own board. There's a few people I know who've done that. A couple of the guys in the squadron have been playing around with Arduino-based homemade senders or transmitters. Motion Sick have one that you can buy ready-made. Again, not cheap, but excellent quality, doesn't drift. Fat Shark used to do one, and if you can still get one of those, they are still available. The ones that go inside the Fat Shark goggles are probably still knocking around a bit more, but the ones that are external, that you can sit on the top of any kind of goggle, they were very good if you can still get one from somewhere. Occasionally you find them,
anti-gravity sports have them, and Flying Tech, I think, in the UK have the internal module. So just so you know.
The one, of course, you then got to figure out how to wire it up. But if you can get the external, you literally just plug and play. But the external ones are really, really hard to find now.
Well, thank you very much, John. I know Martin Thompson, veteran of Model Squadron, has been trying to get hold of Rob from Motion Stick and maybe get some UK stock of the Motion Stick equipment. So I know he's been working on that, but I haven't heard any news. I told him if he's got anywhere, he should let me know by this evening, and I haven't heard anything. So it's still a work in progress, I guess. But
struggling. Tell him to give me a ring, because Rob and I communicate quite a lot. I could
there we go.
In touch a lot easier.
There we go. So I told Martin, John's coming on. We're gonna be sharing scale FPV and head tracking FPV. A load of people. I know. Speaking to you the other week, I immediately ended up buying one of the Motion Stick head trackers because I've been trying to figure out a good way of doing that, and was like, I'll just spend the money and get the thing. So I hope people listening get tempted to have a go as well, and maybe if you build anything, let us know, share some photos. Maybe we can inspire some potential invites to the Model Squadron Invitational May Ball at some point in the future. I'm sharing all this evening. So thank you very much for
it's
your
also
time.
Worth mentioning. Thank you.
You were saying it's worth mentioning something.
For guys who want to do it, you did mention that some people might want to, which to people who are beginners or want to be, they're generally very good social media pieces. If you want the details, you can pack in the lib afterwards.
Yeah. Any details you want to share with us that we can either stick in the show notes or we can share on Discord or anything like that? That is all of that stuff is all great. Always very happy to share things around. So Jack, have you been building up an entire pile of like lists of cake toppers that you need for next week. Oh, what was that? I didn't see. We'll have to watch back and see it.
Yeah, I've got very exciting things. Indeed. Yeah, thank you. It's been episode 500. I can't believe we made it. Zero, if you're listening to that, thank you for being our very first mod. Thank you to Tony for starting it. Thank you to Don Robinson for getting us to start a drone podcast. Thank you to the people who started Mini Air Show that brought us all together. Thank you to Summers Pond for the wonderful memories. Thank you to the hosts that have been and gone: Jay Chipko, Andy RC,
Adam Juniper, Clint Robertson,
Clint, Nico. Who else? Who else do we thank? It's
Blue
like
Owl.
the Oscars, isn't it? Blue Owl, yeah, she was lovely. Mako for always coming on. Final Guide Oz, thank you for everything you've done in the hobby.
Fossil kept us going for a long time.
Fossil, iDrone, Menace, RC, First Person View, even Radio C.
Even Radio C.
Yeah, Radio C. And the massive shout out to the sexiest man alive, NJ Tech.
Of course, who could forget?
Who's used LDO as a stepping stone to be a rock star.
I feel like it was a stepping stone downwards and then back up again.
It was a mild trip
to our level.
Yeah, a mild stumble. Alexander, thank you for showing up. Tailspin, Caroline,
Richard Warwick in the chat.
Richard Warwick, Clive, you're always here. Tailspin, Gigawatts, Magical Pencil, thanks for being a friend. Shady, you're the man. And Swanee Bean. And thank you to D1 and D2 at the Thursday night show for the birthplace of Let's Drone Out. You've been listening to Let's Drone Out. Thank you to all our Patreons. If you got some spare change, please consider donating, even if it's just for a little bit. And also a thank you to my buddy Cole, who does all the wonderful thumbnails and sets up the stream every day. And thank you, Peter, the editor, for putting up with this shit. Good luck with this one.
Only 500 more. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. Don't forget, 20 more episodes. 10 years, baby.
10 years. And we have a big party, lots of pyro. That's what it's going to be.
More fake decorations and indoor fireworks than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and sort of somewhere outdoors to do some outdoor fireworks. That's what I'm gonna try.
It's amazing.
Quick, get the gaffer tape.
I know.
Cool. John, whatever you do not leave after we stop the show. Stay.
We need to get the upload completed. Yes.
Yeah. You've been listening to Let's Drone Out. Thank you to all our Patreons, and good night. See you next week for the party. Bye.
Bye.